back. The Democratic Alliance wants the United Nations Human Rights Council to adopt a resolution against the expropriation of land without compensation. The party says it undermines the constitutional rights of citizens to own property. The DA's chairperson, Annelie Lotriet, joins us now live to tell us about the party's submission. Annelie, thank you so much for making time on the lead this afternoon. Why do you want the United Nations to intervene, especially the Human Rights Council?
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to the viewers. Yes, I think it's very important that we also point out that this is in fact a human rights issue. We have been focusing on the financial implications of an amendment to Section 25. We have focused on the effect it would have on the property market in South Africa and also the security of tenure. However, we have to understand that this is also a moral issue because it is about human rights. And we are petitioning the United Nations Human Rights Council because South Africa is a signatory to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
But that's why there is the process to amend the Constitution to give effect to expropriation without compensation. That process is still in Parliament, and as the DA, you've had an opportunity to make submissions and express your views. Aren't you going ahead of yourselves here?
No, I don't think so. We see this as part of the process of raising our objection, and we think it's very important to make the consequences and the dangers of this proposed amendment public as wide as possible, and to get all support we possibly can and all pressure we can put on the South African government to stop the process, because you will recall last week even former President Thabo Mbeki pointed out to the dangers of this amendment of Section 25. So we think it is time, yes. We're not going to wait until the whole process has been finalized, because then it becomes an act of Parliament.
Yeah, but you don't know how the process is going to conclude. What if it does conclude, in fact, with some concessions? Things like the courts have to play a role in the expropriation, in resolving some of the issues around expropriation of land without compensation, issues around state custodianship. What if some of those issues, there will be concessions there?
Well, if there's a concession about custodianship, good. If there's a concession about the role of the courts, good. But then you have to read the proposed amendment bill. It also states that this is expropriation without compensation on property or land, which includes all improvements on it. Now, that is totally unacceptable. We cannot support that. And if you take that away, then there is no amendment. And that has been our position right from the start.
So what are you proposing then as the DA? Surely you don't want the status quo to continue. We have a skewed land ownership pattern in this country. And correct me if I'm wrong, I remember the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform commissioning the land audit report, and when it was released in 2018, it showed that the country's majority population, black Africans, own the smallest percentage of the country's private land compared to their white counterparts who own almost 3/4. You can't want this pattern to continue.
But the question is, why is that the case? Why, after 27 years, is that still the case? And no one can tell us exactly what in the Constitution, as it stands, prevents proper land reform at a pace that is necessary. It's not the Constitution which is at fault. It is the government's own inability, lack of political will, corruption, lack of funds. That's the problem. Fix that. Don't meddle with the Constitution. And that's the question. Why is the Constitution, Section 25, being held up as the scapegoat?
Yeah.
Because it's only the scapegoat. All it is. It is not the real cause of our land reform or the lack of land reform in this country.
So what needs to happen? What are you proposing as the DA? The willing buyer, willing seller policy hasn't necessarily worked, and possibly that's why the ANC has decided we need to take this approach to the Constitution. How else, as the DA, do you think we can ensure that there's effective land reform without necessarily touching the Constitution?
You see, and that's the problem. Something like willing buyer, willing seller isn't even in the Constitution. That is just being used as a reason why nothing is happening. So the real reason is the department has to get a proper budget. They have to have staff who can do their work. There is all the opportunity within the Constitution, as it is within legislation, to effect proper land reform. And that is what the DA says. Just go ahead and do it. Look at the Western Cape. We have had the most success with land reform projects and providing ownership, title deed to property owners, and promoting the agricultural sector so it can be done. It's a matter of political will.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, Constitution is now held up as the reason. It is definitely not the reason why there isn't proper land reform.
Yeah. Have you received any response from the United Nations? When are you expecting it?
No, we don't know when to expect it. We have written to them, so we will give them time to respond. And remember that the closing date for the ad hoc committee on amending Section 25 is only 30 August. So we still have time.
All right. Thank you so much for making time this afternoon. The DA's caucus chairperson, Annelie Lotriet.